Hello, and welcome to our webinar titled Castilleja Schools Automates Data Protections and Shortens RTO. My name is Juan Villa. I'm a solutions architect for Amazon Web Services, and I will be your host and moderator for today's presentation. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join by either phone call or your computer's audio. If for any reason you would like to change your audio selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in the control panel. From this control panel, you will also have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the question panel. We will collect the questions and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Also, at the end of today's event is a brief survey. Please stay connected until the end of the broadcast and submit your feedback, as your opinion matters to us. Lastly, the PowerPoint presentation will be available through SlideShare, along with a recording of the webinar on YouTube. You will receive this via an email that will be sent 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of the event. So keep an eye out for the follow-up email sent to the address that you provided. Again, welcome to today's live webinar. My name, as I said before, is Juan Villa. I'm a solutions architect for Amazon Web Services, and I will be your host and moderator for today's webinar. In addition to learning about AWS, you will also hear from Kenneth Huey, who's the technical marketing engineer for Rubrik, and you will also hear from Terry Young, who's a senior network and systems administrator for Castilleja Schools. During today's webinar, we will cover backup and recovery on AWS. This will be about probably 5 to 10 minutes. We will then jump immediately into a discussion from Rubrik on cloud data management and their solution. And we will also go into a case study from Castilleja Schools, where we will discuss some challenges and solutions to some of the backup and recovery workloads that they have. And towards the end of the webinar, we will go into a Q&A session where we will attempt to address as many of the questions that you have submitted during today's presentation. We also hope that today you will learn how to simplify backup and recovery on AWS and in hybrid environments. We also hope that you'll learn methods for achieving cost-effective data protection using Rubrik on AWS and how to use Rubrik to back up cloud-native workloads on AWS. Now, without further ado, let's talk real quick about backup and recovery on AWS. Amazon Web Services currently spans 54 availability zones within 18 geographic regions. These are regions all over the world, as you can see in this diagram. We've also announced plans for 12 more availability zones with 4 more regions in Bahrain, Hong Kong, Sweden, and a second AWS GovCloud region in the United States. Every single one of these regions has 1 or more availability zones, actually 2 or more availability zones, as you can see in the diagram above. Each availability zone is a completely fault-tolerant compartmentalization of our region where you can run your workloads. Running workloads in 2 or more availability zones means you've achieved high availability for your solution. And distributing these applications across the world can be achieved by leveraging 2 or more of our regions around the world. At AWS, we also are very familiar with compliance and certifications and regulations. We currently support a whole wide variety of them. This is just a very small subset of them, some of which are probably very familiar to you guys, like, for example, HIPAA, FedRAMP, and our great GDPR as well, right? We have a lot of customers that are currently working through that and have been for the last year or so, and we've worked together with them. All of our regulations and compliance and certification programs are broken up into 3 categories. They're broken up into what we call certifications and attestations, laws, regulations, and privacy compliance, and finally, alignments and frameworks. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out our website at aws.amazon.com/compliance for a more deeper dive into each one of these programs and all the different compliance programs that we currently support. So let's talk real quick about what we call the storage platform at AWS. We think of storage really as a platform, and we offer different storage services designed for different kinds of workloads. Starting from the top left, you see Amazon Elastic File System. This is a file storage system that we have designed to be very easy to consume. It provides an NFS share that is accessible from your applications running on AWS. You don't have to manage the underlying file system or service. The service grows as your capacity grows with it, and so does the bandwidth for it as well, so the capacity of it. In addition to this file storage service, we also offer our block storage service, which is called Amazon Elastic Block Store. This is what our Elastic Compute Cloud service runs on. So whenever you spin up an EC2 instance and you need to be running an operating system with a familiar file system that's running all the operating system files and your application, this would be running on top of an Elastic Block Store. But in addition to the Elastic Block Store, which is distributed across an entire region for availability, we also have local to some Elastic Compute instance types. We have something called Instance Store, which is a very high-speed ephemeral access directly tied to the hypervisor. Both of these are block storage mechanisms or solutions. And finally, a third type of storage that we have at AWS is called the Object Store. This is perhaps our most familiar, our most popular storage service. And it all started with Amazon Simple Storage Service, or Amazon S3. And then we shortly introduced after that Amazon Glacier. Both of these services provide object storage access, which is very similar to a key value dictionary, where you can actually upload an object with some kind of key, and the value would be the content of the object. And unlike a file system, there actually is no hierarchy in this, but it is essentially infinitely elastic. And it grows as you consume it, whether you're storing 5 gigs or 5 terabytes or 5 petabytes. The solution is priced by the amount that you store and how you access it. Finally, at the bottom of this slide, we see a multitude of ways to access your data. We have everything from AWS Direct Connect, which is a way to connect your data centers directly to AWS via private connectivity that does not traverse the internet, that gives you essentially very low jitter, low latency, high reliability, and actually low cost for accessing data. And we also have other mechanisms like Snowball. We have connectors through some of our ISV partners and other solutions like AWS Storage Gateway and application integrations like Amazon Kinesis Data Firehose. And these are just a very small subset, just to give you guys a little bit of a preview. There's a lot more of these and a lot of different ways to integrate with AWS services, particularly our storage services. So now we're going to focus a little bit on object storage with S3. We have designed these services to support what we call storage tiering. And storage tiering allows you to choose between different storage classes depending on how you access your data. If you have data that we call hot data or active data that you're constantly needing to access and need to access with low latency, then you can leverage our standard storage class. So this is what existed at the very beginning. And since then, we've created other kinds of storage classes, like, for example, our infrequent access class. This class has the advantage of being significantly lower cost for storage, but the pricing mechanism is different. In this one, you do pay per gigabytes of data that you access back from S3. So it is very suitable for what we call infrequently accessed data, or what we generally call warm data, not exactly cold, but somewhere in between your hot and your cold data. So data that you maybe access, let's say once a month, twice a month, would be very suitable for the infrequent access storage class. And finally, we have Glacier. Glacier is our deep storage, cold storage solution. It is the most cost-effective in terms of price per gigabyte for storage. And it is truly meant for cold storage. It is usually used for regulatory compliance when you need to keep, for example, the last 20 years worth of emails, or you need to keep, the last 200 versions of your last CAD design for your product, but but there's a very small chance that you will ever access it. But you still need to keep it in the event you do need to access it. That's what Amazon Glacier is for. Now, if we take a step back and look at the AWS storage solutions in terms of a big picture, we can identify a series of benefits when it comes to backup and recovery on AWS. The first of these is perhaps the fact that these are all very well integrated with each other. So when you're building an application on AWS, you can leverage our storage services in a very easy way. You can consume them very easily through our SDKs. And in many cases, you can actually integrate services one with the other without writing a single line of code. So you can create workflows where, for example, you have data that gets uploaded to S3, and then through integration, that triggers some other action that will occur within AWS. That could be like sending someone an email that a file was dropped inside of our object storage service, right? And you can do all that without writing a single line of code, actually. We also, another benefit is security. Security at AWS is indeed job zero. We provide as many control mechanisms as possible to our customers to make sure that they can achieve the best possible security posture. This involves or includes providing customers with mechanisms like being able to provide encryption in transit, encryption at rest or storage, as well as a lot of access and control policies for S3, for example, that allows you to control which objects can and can't be accessed by who, from where, during what time. You have a whole bunch of mechanisms to make sure you lock your solution down as much as you want to. All these solutions are easy to maintain. There's no need to buy anything up front. There's no capital investment. There's no need for on-premise hardware for the majority of these solutions. They are really truly designed to be click and go, so to be very easy to use. And like I mentioned earlier, they're scalable. They scale up and down with your demands, whether you need more or less storage, or whether you need to access it quicker or slower. We scale with you. And finally, these solutions are all designed to be low cost. They are building blocks for storage solutions. You pay as you go for them, and you pay for what you use. So you might be surprised to get an 80-cent bill one month expecting a $200 bill. And that's simply because we really do only charge you for what you consume in terms of storage and access for our different services. Now, you might be wondering how all this ties to the partner network and to some of our fantastic partners like Rubrik. AWS has a mature partner ecosystem with partners that have achieved what we call the storage competency. This is our highest level of accomplishment for storage partners. Our partners, such as Rubrik, usually build world-class solutions that leverage not only their core expertise in the industry that they're in, but they also leverage AWS expertise, experience, infrastructure, and our services to build their solutions. And they will generally provide solutions that are very easy to configure. They provide functionality that we consider to be enterprise-grade functionality that we don't currently provide on the individual services, but our partners fill in those gaps and provide those services. They will provide things like asynchronous replication, support for hybrid deployments, where you can have your data both on-premise and in AWS for backup and recovery, or for just application workloads. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Ken. He is the technical marketing engineer for Rubrik, who will now be talking about Rubrik and cloud data management.
Thank you, Juan. And thank you, everyone. Appreciate this opportunity to share with you about Rubrik and our cloud data management platform. My name is Kenneth Hoy. I'm a technical marketing engineer at Rubrik. So let's dive right in, if we could. So let's talk first about what is Rubrik and Rubrik Cloud Data Management, for those who are unfamiliar with who we are. So Rubrik was designed really from the ground up to take a brand new approach to protecting both virtualized environments on premises, as well as cloud workloads and other large data sets. And to do that, we actually came up and designed a solution around several design principles. One of those principles being that we want to simplify data management architectures by taking what was typically a bunch of point solutions like deduplication, like backups, like tape, and converge that down to a single software platform that can be implemented on any standard x86 hardware on premises, or in a virtualized instance or as a cloud instance in AWS. And furthermore, we built that platform to scale out architecture. So as you add more data to your environment, you can just add more Rubrik instances, and that will scale to meet your growing demand. As well, we wanted to simplify things as things scale by adding a lot of automated policies. So when you add additional workloads, you don't have to manually reset things or rebalance things. The algorithm underneath of Rubrik will actually rebalance workloads for you as you are protecting them. And finally, we integrate with leading cloud providers such as Amazon Web Services to enable customers to both have a cost-effective way to save their data and also as a way to help them migrate to a much more innovative platform. I want to talk a bit about some of the cloud use cases that our customers do today using Rubrik. Specifically, I want to talk about CloudOut, which is the ability to take your backup data from your on-premises environment and archive them out to Amazon S3. Also, we support a functionality called CloudOn, where you can essentially instantiate your on-premises workload and replicate that to the cloud to run it for DR purposes or for test dev. And finally, we have a cloud cluster, which is the ability to run a Rubrik instance in the cloud to protect your cloud workloads. So let's address some of these use cases in more detail. The first, again, is CloudOut. So CloudOut is our solution that enables customers like Castilleja, who you hear from shortly, to protect their on-premises workloads and then send that data off to S3 or Glacier for retention. And customers do this because they want to, quite frequently, they want to replace their tape infrastructure. And they find that by using something like Amazon S3, they're able to do so more efficiently, more cost effectively, and more reliably. So a very typical use case would be a customer who wants to back up their data, retain it on site on a Rubrik appliance for 30 to 60 days, and then automatically move that data to S3 for long-term retention. Another use case is for customers to move that data into Amazon so that they can use that for things like analytics or use that data for things like test dev and again for DR testing. In addition to S3, as I mentioned, Rubrik also supports storing backup data to Amazon Glacier for long-term data retention and archiving. So again, this is typically for customers that have data that maybe after 30, 60, 90 days or a year even, they will need to save that somewhere, but they don't need to retrieve that on a frequent basis, so they can tolerate a bit of delay in getting that data back when they need it, but at a much lower cost. And Rubrik is also integrated with Glacier's Vault Lock capability for compliance controls. So I want to talk a bit about the way we store data in S3, because we do that in a very intelligent manner. For example, we don't just send all full backups to S3 every backup. In fact, we only send incremental changes to S3, which minimizes both your storage costs in Amazon as well as the bandwidth cost. In addition, we actually index every snapshot that we take on premises before it's even stored in S3. So customers don't have to walk through all their snapshots just to find a piece of data. They can actually do a browse and search in our GUI in order to find a specific file or virtual machine that they're looking for. And finally, we also apply that same intelligence to the way we recover data. So when a customer needs to recover a file that's already been archived to Amazon S3, instead of having to recover, for example, an entire file system or virtual machine, we will only send back the specific file that they're looking for, which then again minimizes both bandwidth and egress transfer costs. And finally, we store file metadata with the object as we store it in S3, so that instead of having a central catalog that we would need to recover if your Rubrik instance is unavailable, in the event of a disaster, you can actually just bring up a new Rubrik instance, and we'll read that metadata with the files, and be able to do a quick recovery of your data from S3. And then Juan talked about how security is job zero at Amazon, and that is the case for Rubrik as well. And so we took seriously the approach of making sure that everything is secure end to end. From the time that you back up your data, whether it's on premises or in Amazon, all data is sent using TLS 1.2 or 1.1. And then the data is always encrypted at rest using either using AES 256 data encryption algorithm, so that your data is always protected. And then I want to quickly address use case 2, which is our CloudOn, the ability to instantiate new workloads, your workloads in the cloud. So this is the ability to take that backup data that you've already sent off to S3 and be able to instantiate essentially a replica of your on-premises environment and run that in Amazon at EC2 instances, allowing customers the ability to either use it as a migration tool from on-premises to Amazon, use it as a test dev environment so they can spin up test devs on EC2 instances for their as a match to their production environment on premises, or it can even be used as a low-cost DR solution. And the benefit for customers is that besides having mobility of their data and being able to quickly spin up a new environment, it also eliminates the need for an idle infrastructure. So instead of having to have a second data center that may only be used infrequently, but you have to pay for all the time, 24/7, you can just pay for the resources you use when they're instantiated in Amazon. And here's a quick example of what that might look like if you want to use CloudOn with Rubrik running in AWS, where we take your backup data, as you can see, store it in S3 bucket, and then we're able to work with AWS to convert, for example, your VMware VMDK disk, and convert them to Amazon machine images so that to launch again a replica of your on-premises environment in AWS. And the last thing I want to talk about is our ability to protect native AWS workloads running in EC2. So just as we integrate natively on premises with products like VMware and Hyper-V and SQL Server and Oracle, we also integrate natively with the EC2 API so that we can essentially take snapshots of any EC2 instances running on EBS volumes, and then also use that to create Amazon machine images so that you can recover data quickly, and you can also spin up new instances as you need to in different regions even. And the use cases for that are many. The reason we took this approach of wanting to integrate with EC2 and EBS snapshots is that we have customers telling us that they want to be able to automate what's typically a very manual process around lifecycle management of their EC2 protections. So for example, customers can use Rubrik to automate this lifecycle management, like scheduling of snapshots and also of retention of snapshots. We can delete snapshots and expire them as needed. Second, we want to automate a lot of the manual steps that would be required to recover either an instance or a file or even a single file. So again, we apply that what we talked about with CloudOut, where we can index every file that's in a snapshot, even an EBS snapshot in this case, so the customer can just search for a file and then recover that file very quickly. Third, we wanted the ability for customers to be able to quickly replicate their instances in other availability zones and regions. So we automate a lot of that process of copying an Amazon machine image from one region to another. And finally, by integrating EBS snapshot management into Rubrik, we give customers a single tool, single workflow for managing protection of their data, whether it's on premises or in AWS. So with that, want to end by reminding people that Rubrik is both cloud data managers will help organizations manage their data on premises or in the cloud using common interface, a single set of APIs, and that again, this software can run either as a hardware appliance in your data center, as a virtualized instance or as a cloud instance in AWS. So thanks for your time. And at this point, I want to turn things over to Terry Young from Castilleja School, so he can talk more about how they're using Rubrik and AWS to simplify and modernize their IT infrastructure.
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. My name is Terry Young, and I'm the Senior Network and Systems Administrator here at Castilleja School. Today, I'm just going to give a brief background of the school, sort of the journey undertaken in why migrating from a traditional solution over to Rubrik and AWS. Castilleja School is located in Palo Alto, California. It was founded in 1907, and our mission has always been to educate and empower young women so they are instilled with a sense of purpose to make a difference in the world. We're an independent school serving girls grades 6 through 12. All our graduates continue their higher education in their top choice college. Half of them have expressed an interest in pursuing a major in the STEM field. So what were the challenges I was facing with before Rubrik and AWS? Essentially, it was a solution that was comprised of different disparate elements that needed to be managed separately, such as the backup software, the operating system it was running on, as well as the physical server, and in my particular scenario, a SAN, and ultimately a tape construct of some sort. It was also a single node architecture and inherently very challenging to scale for redundancy purposes. There was also the time and complexity of managing tape rotation, along with the additional constraints of only storing those tape to a local geographic location. Recovery time will vary depending on where the source material is kept. It could be hours or days, depending on the size of the material that I was trying to recover and where do I have to recover it from. Here is a very quick, simple diagram of what was I just highlighted, sort of in a stack format. At the very top, there's the recovery software backup solution, followed by the operating system. Could be Windows, Linux, or any other variants. Then the server component, the physical server, as well as the storage. And off to the side, there's the tape element and sort of the manual process that you have to go through in managing the physical rotation of the tape itself. So the appeal for using AWS and Rubrik for me was the simplicity. Even though it was IT, but beyond the initial setup, the day-to-day experience is very analogous to using a mobile device. You are more engaged in using it as a platform than trying to wrestle it and maintain usability. There's the policy-driven lifecycle that completely takes away the manual piece when having to deal with the traditional tape operation. And using S3, as Juan was talking about in its architecture, it essentially displays the traditional tape automatically, as the architecture itself has redundancy built in. And you're not really have to concern about the data availability. And on top of which, because of the geographic location, that as a customer, you can elect to choose to store elsewhere. And certainly the cost model is very friendly, from slowly ramping sort of that experience with the cloud and ultimately moving a lot of sort of the backup and archive into the cloud itself. And here is just a quick diagram illustrating the simple architecture by using Rubrik and AWS. Currently, I have a single Rubrik appliance deployed on-site that is backing up elements in the data center. Based on policies defined and using CloudOut, the backup sets are archived into S3 on AWS. In my particular case, I am using the US West region in Oregon that has 3 availability zones, which affords me the ability to distribute my data sets across those 3 availability zones, as well as having a good geographic separation between me in California and where my offsite data is being stored. Out of the box, redundancy is built into the Rubrik appliance simply because of the 4-node architecture. And the added benefit is in a very condensed form factor, 2U. So for me, the end result for having choose to leverage both Rubrik and AWS allows the simplification of managing a backup. It essentially boils it down to a single vendor for software image, whether it's hardware, firmware, or anything that's needed to ensure the embedded storage elements in those nodes work seamlessly. And more equally as important, using S3, it completely eliminates the challenges that I would traditionally have to deal with in managing tapes. Tapes were very difficult because you have to be aware that there may be media defect, whether it's due to manufacture or latent over a period of time. There's the periodic challenges in terms of keeping the head drive clean as well as being aligned, as the heads themselves can drift over time, rendering recovery problematic. It also, for using the combined solution of Rubrik and AWS, it allows me to reduce my physical footprint from traditionally it was 11U down to a 2U form factor, as well as substantial savings in energy consumption. And most importantly, freed up a lot of my time from managing the backup solution from what traditionally felt more like a babysitting job. And I can reuse those reclaim times that I have now to focus on more important tasks. And with that said, I sort of wrapped up my section. I'd like to turn it back over to Ken to wrap things up.
Okay, thanks, Terry. I appreciate you sharing your experience with Rubrik and AWS and helping what you're doing over at Castilleja. So I want to summarize what you might have heard today. A couple of salient points. One is that Rubrik and AWS together, we're really focused around automating how you manage and protect your data in order to make it, to simplify it for you and to do it in a very secure, scalable manner so that you can, as Terry mentioned, you can focus on much more important tasks than managing your backups and managing the infrastructure underneath your backups. In addition, we are very focused around helping you save money really in terms of how you retain your data, and also to improve the reliability of your data recovery by replacing what is very expensive and often very unreliable tape infrastructure with Rubrik and Amazon S3. And also we want to make sure you're in the event that you need to recover data, you're able to be backed up and running very quickly. So we're reducing the time that you need to recover whether it's a single file or an entire server or virtual machine. And finally, this is all about lowering the cost of ownership for your data protection, while also giving you a much higher return on investment of around what you invest in Rubrik and in AWS. So at this point, I want to turn this over to Juan again so we can go over some of the questions that may have come online.
All right, thank you very much, Terry and Ken. I appreciate the presentation. All right, folks, so we are in our Q&A section for this webinar. If you have not already submitted your question via the question panel, please go ahead and do so. We will spend the next about 15 minutes going over the questions that you submitted to us. I will be addressing these questions to either Rubrik, Castilleja, or myself if it's an AWS question. All right, let's go ahead and get started with some of the questions that we already have. So I've got here the first question is for Rubrik, and the question is, what kind of workloads can you back up on-premise and archive to S3?
Yeah, good question. So as I alluded to, we support a very wide variety of on-premises as well as cloud data. So for the on-premises workload particularly, we support Hyper-V as well as VMware. We support operating systems such as Windows, Linux, and now also Solaris and AIX, with more coming your way. We also support protecting NAS data and databases such as Microsoft SQL Server and Oracle databases. And again, more databases will be added in the future.
Excellent, thanks, Ken. All right, and we've got here a question this time for Castilleja. The question is, how much are you storing and how long are your retentions on Amazon S3?
Good question. Thank you, Juan. So the amount of footprint that I am consuming on S3 currently is about 43 terabytes. And the retention varies, depends on the particular workload that I want to protect. The longest currently that's being retained on S3 is up to a year. And that is specifically to address a file server that I have that everybody utilized to store document. And in my use case, the reason for 1 year is because we're an educational institution and we have an academic cycle of August to June. And there have been on occasion where an individual requires something to recover from the prior school year once the next cycle kicks in the beginning. So it sort of varies, but anywhere from, I think the minimum is about 30 days up to a single year.
Excellent. Thanks, Terry. All right, and we have another question now back to Rubrik, again from Rubrik. The question is, how does Rubrik protect against propagation of corrupt data and or ransomware?
Yes, perfect question. So this is actually a strong area for us among many. We have customers who are actually they've been able to protect against ransomware because what Rubrik does is when we actually back up your data, we actually make that backup data immutable, which means it cannot actually be changed. It cannot be encrypted. So you know that backup data is untouched by any ransomware that you may have in your environment. And then customers can basically take those backups and roll it back to that point in time, knowing that that data is untouched. And in the future, we'll add other capabilities that allow you to more rapidly determine when you do have a ransomware and be able to quickly get to an exact point in time restore.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Ken. All right, we have here another question for Castilleja for Terry. So the question is, how has the experience been for recovery? Can you provide an example?
Sure, absolutely. The experience has been the way I would sort of characterize it as more consumer friendly instead of a traditional IT feeling for it. Because part of the simplicity stems from the fact that Rubrik has sort of that Google-like search capability where you can sort of type in keywords for certain elements you're looking for, and then as you're typing, that predictive nature starts to bubble up things that you're looking for immediately. So a great example was, I think a couple months ago, somebody from an individual in our business department was working on a budget forecast, and on that particular day, she recognized that there were some changes made to it that she didn't want, and subsequently she required a copy that was more than 2 weeks ago. And in that particular instance, I was able to quickly, using that predictive search, be able to sort of look up the name of the document, and as you're typing, it starts to bubble up. And from there, as you click into it, you are provided the option of sort of how far back you want to go and recover particular data. So it was a relatively painless procedure from just a typical search everybody's familiar with, selecting the point in time, and upon that, the process kicks off. So end to end, to recover that single Excel file in this instance was probably no more than 5 to 7 minutes, as fast as I can log into the system, type, select, and Rubrik sort of kind of process that request. Another example was there were early last year, or in my academic cycle, so this would have been around August of last year, we were performing some upgrades. It didn't went as smoothly. Subsequently, we have to do a rollback, and because of the nature of the ability to spin up an instant copy from Rubrik from the appliance, I was able to quickly be up and running in less than 10 minutes from the time I got the call till getting things up and running again. So for me, the experience from a recovery standpoint has been very seamless and very user-friendly.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Terry. All right, we have another question here from the audience. This one's specifically addressed to AWS, so I'm going to do my best to address this question. The question is, so recovering from EBS snapshots, so stored in S3, requires pre-warming of the volume. And that process can take a long time for example, 1 terabyte of data. So how can we shorten that duration or that time period for disaster recovery applications. So what I can say to that is that AWS has made a lot of optimizations around launching EC2 instances from snapshots. These snapshots are stored in S3 and can be of numerous sizes, anywhere from just a gig to multiple terabytes. And the way that it actually works is that data is actually streamed on demand from S3 to the EC2 block storage volume as the instance is running. A lot of our customers have coined this term pre-warming, where they essentially make sure that the entire volume has been completely loaded so that any block within the volume can be accessed immediately with the highest possible performance. Well, we found that the majority of our customers actually don't do this, because when they have, for example, a 1 terabyte snapshot, their actual core application actually goes online and back in production with just a very small portion or a small subset of that 1 terabyte. They don't need that immediate access to all the data. And as they access the data gets loaded on demand from S3. Some of the use cases that I've worked personally with customers on are things like backing up a database, where they have the entire database stored on the volume on premise, for example. And this could be, let's say, 1 terabyte for this discussion. And then they want to back it up and then restore it into AWS. And then there's the question of, how does the performance of my database get affected? The reality is that in a situation like that, as the solutions architect, I would advise the customer against that approach, because there are different other approaches that are more effective and better performing than to actually use an EBS snapshot recovery for a database, for example. So with a database solution, whatever it might be, MySQL, or it could be SQL Server from Microsoft, when you do your backups on some periodic basis, you could dump these backups into a solution like, for example, and manage it with something like Rubrik, so that those backups and database dumps could actually be replicated to AWS and accessed quickly for recovery. You could send them directly to S3 if you wanted to do so. There's a couple of partner solutions out there that can do that. But perhaps the better solution in that case is to set up an asynchronous database replication from on-premise to AWS. That would allow you to recover the quickest. That's what a lot of our customers are doing between their data center and cloud hybrid environments, or cloud to cloud, cloud native environments, so that they can not necessarily work around, but architect better, so that they don't have the issue of needing or feeling like they need to pre-warm an entire volume up to 1 terabyte. So hopefully that answers that question. It's a little bit of a deep topic. If you have a more specific question within that, please definitely let us know and we'll do our best to address it. All right, so in addition to that question, let's see, we got a couple more questions here. All right, we got another question here for Rubrik. The question here is, how much will it cost for Rubrik to retrieve data from AWS to on-premises?
Okay, great question. So as I mentioned earlier, we actually optimize really well in terms of for the recovery use case from S3. As I mentioned before, if you as you back up your data, we back up your data and then archive it off to S3 or Glacier. What we do is, as if you need to recover a single file from S3, we don't actually have to bring back, for example, the entire virtual machine that file was in the file system that virtual machine uses. We only locate that file, and we find the blocks basically that underlie that file, and then that's the only thing we bring back on premises. So in that case, it could be just a fraction of the space that was used by that entire snapshot. So that obviously minimizes the egress costs coming out of S3, which it can be a big deal for our customers.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Ken. Got here a question for Terry. The question is, how much daily management do you have to perform?
Great question. Thank you, Juan. For me, the daily management has been very minimal. as I sort of alluded to in my section, apart from just the initial setup, the day-to-day interaction with it is minimal from the sense of I don't have to babysit. There are alerts you can set up if jobs fail or any other type of failure condition that occurs if backups didn't run. For me, it's mostly about just being aware of what the system is doing. So I don't, on a daily basis, go into the system unless there's an email alert about something failing. So me going into Rubrik is mostly just almost like, you lift up the hood of the car and just making sure things are still there from sort of a status check. But you're not really reacting to it because something isn't working or you worry about that. Things are failing or any of that, simply because of the way it's architecture as well as the redundancy, especially the S3 component. I never have to worry about the data availability or whether something is going to go corrupt over a period of time. So it's a very seamless, almost set it and forget it unless there's an alert alarm that gets triggered. Thank you for that question.
All right, excellent, thanks. All right, we've got a question here back to Rubrik. The question is, does Rubrik support Glacier Vault Lock?
As I mentioned earlier, we do support Vault Lock. So, and actually, you are able to activate that from within the Rubrik dashboard. So you don't even have to do that outside using the console. So you basically just check off that you want to apply the Vault Lock to a particular Glacier vault. We'll interact with the Glacier APIs, give you a grace period to make sure that you actually do want to apply the Vault Lock. And then after that, we will apply the Vault Lock and then make that completely immutable in any way, and also track any potential access to that data.
All right, perfect. That sounds excellent for compliance and regulatory requirements. All right, got another question here for Castilleja. The question is, are you exploring other use cases with Rubrik other than the one that you just mentioned?
Yes, currently I'm going through sort of an exploratory phase where I'm trying out the CloudOn capability, which is instantiating a backup that's stored on S3 over on the EC2. I'm sort of trying out, see what is needed for my particular case, looking at potentially migrating some workload from running on-premise out to the cloud, or looking at ways to address disaster recovery. But I think my primary focus, at least for the first phase, is looking at what workloads can I leverage the EC2 component and just run them in the cloud itself as opposed to on-premise. Because I think my footprint is in such a way where you can sort of go either way on certain workload from a cost perspective, whether it's more cost effective to run things on-premise or in EC2. So using the CloudOn certainly allows me the flexibility to go model what the cost structure looks like, as well as seeing what other architectural changes I need to make in order to accommodate sort of this hybrid ability. Thank you for that question.
All right, thanks again. And I think we have a follow-up to that question. You mentioned CloudOn. How does CloudOn work?
Sure. I'll take that question. So the way CloudOn works is essentially when we take a snapshot, for example, of your VMware environment and those virtual machines. When we send that snapshot off to Amazon S3, what we can do is when a customer says, I want to instantiate a replica of that virtual machine as an EC2 instance, we will prepare that virtual, the VMDK file out of that snapshot in S3. We will actually then interact with the AWS import-export service to do the conversion over to an Amazon machine image. And then a customer can actually use either the Rubrik dashboard, use an API call, use the AWS console, then to launch instances using that Amazon machine image. So that's how it works.
All right, excellent. All right, so with that, we've actually concluded our Q&A section for this live webinar. I would like to bring your attention to next steps and further information and really urge you to check out these resources. If you want to learn more about Rubrik on AWS, we have a couple of links here, one to an ebook that talks more about Rubrik and their solutions, as well as a written form of the case study that we just went over today. And these are available in the links on this presentation. If you want more technical information about the solutions that were discussed today, you can check out Rubrik at rubrik.com/resources and take a look at their blog at rubrik.com/blog. And finally, if you haven't yet checked out AWS directly, please head on over to aws.amazon.com/free to create your account and get access to what we call the first year free tier, where you'll have an opportunity to try a whole bunch of different services from AWS at absolutely no cost to you. And finally, I want to say thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. Please remember to stay connected and complete the brief survey at the conclusion of this webinar, which is in the next minute or so. We look forward to supporting you in your current and future projects. Is there anything we can do? Just let us know. Once again, thank you all very much for attending and have a great day.